This is pertaining to the uprising that occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma 100 years ago. Mr. President Joe Biden is speaking right now and honoring the victims of those of race massacres that occurred during that time. Please listen.
Only with truth can come healing and justice and repair. Only with truth. Facing it. But that isn't. First we have to see, hear, and give respect to Mother Randall, Mother Fletcher, and Mr. Van Ellis. And to all those lost so many years ago, to all the descendants of those who suffered, this community, that's why we're here, to shine a light, to make sure America knows the story in full. May 1921, formerly enslaved black people and their descendants are here in Tulsa, a boomtown of oil and opportunity and a new frontier. On the north side, across the rail tracks that divided the city already segregated by law, they built something of their own, worthy of their talent and their ambition. Greenwood, a community, a way of life. Black doctors and lawyers, pastors, teachers, running hospitals, law practices, libraries, churches, schools. Black veterans, like a man I had the privilege of giving a command coin to, who fought, volunteered and fought and came home and still faced such prejudice. Veterans have been back a few years helping after winning the First World War, building a new life back home with pride and confidence. For a mom and there were at the time mom and pop black diners, grocery stores, barber shops, tailors, the things that make up a community. At the Dreamland Theater, a young black couple holding hands, falling in love. Friends gathered at music clubs and pool halls. At the Monroe family roller skating rink. Visitors staying in hotels like the Stratford. All around, black pride shared by the professional class and the working class, who lived together side by side for blocks on end. Mother Randall was just 6 years old. 6 years old, living with her grandma. She said she was lucky to have a home and toys and fortunate to live without fear. Mother Fletcher was 7 years old, second of 7 children, the youngest being Mr. Van Ellis, was just a few months old. The children, former sharecroppers, and they went to bed at night in Greenwood. Mother Fletcher says they fell asleep rich in terms of the wealth, not real wealth, but a different wealth, a wealth in culture, in community, and heritage. But one night changed everything. Everything changed. While Green was a community to itself, it was not separated from the outside. It wasn't everyone, but there was enough hate, resentment and vengeance in the community. Enough people who believed that America does not belong to everyone and not everyone is created equal. Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Black Americans. A belief enforced by law, by badge, by hood, and by noose that speaks to that lit the fuse. It lit it by the spark that it provided. The fuse of fury was an innocent interaction that turned into an It's a terrible, terrible headline allegation of a black male teenager attacking a white female teenager. A white mob of 1,000 gathered around the courthouse where the black teenager is being held, ready to do what still occurred: lynch that young man that night. But 75 black men, including black veterans, arrived to stand guard. Words were exchanged, then a scuffle, then shots fired. Hell was unleashed. Literal hell was unleashed. Through the night and into the morning, the mob terrorized Greenwood, torches and guns, shooting at will. A mob tied a black man by the waist to the back of their truck with his head banging along the pavement as they drove off. A murdered black family draped over the fence of their home outside. An elderly couple knelt by their bed praying to God with their heart and their soul, and there was a shot in the back of their heads. Private planes dropping explosives. The first and only domestic aerial assault of its kind on an American city, here in Tulsa. 8 of Greenwood's nearly 24 churches burned like Mount Zion across the street at Vernon AME. Mother Randall said it was like a war. Mother Fletcher says all these years later, she still sees black bodies around. The Greenwood newspaper publisher, A.J. Smitherman, penned a poem of what he heard and felt that night. And here's the poem. He said, "Kill them, burn them, set the pace, teach them how to keep their place. Reign of murder, theft, and plunder was the order of the night." That's what he remembered in the poem that he wrote. 100 years ago, at this hour, on this first day of June, smoke darkened the Tulsa sky, rising from 35 blocks of Greenwood that were left in ash and ember, raised in rubble. Less than 24 hours, 1,100 black homes and businesses were lost. Insurance companies, they had insurance, many of them, rejected claims of damage. 10,000 people were left destitute and homeless, placed in internment camps. As I was told today, they were told, "Don't you mention you were ever in a camp, or we'll come and get you." That's what survivors told. Yet no arrest of the mob were made, none. No proper accounting of the dead. The death toll records by local officials said there were 36 people. That's all, 36 people. Based on studies, records, and accounts, the likelihood and the likely number is much more in the multiple of hundreds. Untold bodies dumped into mass graves. Families who at a time waited for hours and days to know the fate of their loved ones are now descendants who have gone 100 years without closure. But you know, as we speak, the process of exhuming the unmarked graves has started. And at this moment, I'd like to pause for a moment of silence for the fathers, the mothers, the sisters, sons and daughters, friends of God and Greenwood. They deserve the dignity and they deserve our respect. May their souls rest in peace. My fellow Americans, this was not a riot. This was a massacre. among the worst in our history, but not the only one. And for too long, forgotten by our history. As soon as it happened, there was a clear effort to erase it from our memory, our collective memories, from the news and everyday conversations. For a long time, schools in Tulsa didn't even teach it, let alone schools elsewhere. And most people didn't realize that a century ago, the second Ku Klux Klan had been founded. The second Ku Klux Klan had been founded. A friend of mine, John Meacham, I'd written when I said I was running to restore the soul of America. He wrote a book called The Soul of America, not because of what I said. There's a picture about page 160 in the book showing over 30,000 Ku Klux Klan members in full regalia, Reverend. Pointed hats, the robes,
30,000.
marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., Jesse. You know all about this. Washington, D.C. If my memory is correct, there were 37 members of the House of Representatives who were open members of the Klan. There were 5, if I'm not mistaken, could have been 7, I think it was 5 members of the United States Senate, open members of the Klan. Multiple governors were open members of the Klan. Most people didn't realize that a century ago the Klan was founded just 6 years before the horrific destruction here in Tulsa. And one of the reasons why it was founded was because of guys like me who are Catholic. It wasn't about African Americans then. It was about making sure that all those Polish and Irish and Italian and Eastern European Catholics who came to the United States after World War I would not pollute Christianity. The flames from those burning crosses torched every region of the country. Millions of white Americans belonged to the Klan, and they weren't even embarrassed by it. They were proud of it. And that hate became embedded systematically and systemically in our laws and our culture. We do ourselves no favors by pretending none of this ever happened, or it doesn't impact us today, because it does still impact us today. We can't just choose to learn what we want to know and not what we should know. We should know the good, the bad, everything. That's what great nations do. They come to terms with their dark sides. And we're a great nation. The only way to build a common ground is to truly repair and to rebuild. I come here to help fill the silence, because in silence, wounds deepen.
Amen.
And only, as painful as it is, only in remembrance do wounds heal.
What he just said makes more sense than anything that I've ever heard about the Oklahoma bombing. Let's listen to it one more time.
You just have to choose.
Back up. Boom.
And only, as painful as it is, only in remembrance do wounds heal. We just have to choose to remember. We memorialize what happened here in Tulsa, so it can't be erased. We know here, in this hallowed place, we simply can't bury pain and trauma forever. And at some point, there'll be a reckoning, an inflection point, like we're facing right now as a nation.
Like they was facing in 1995 pertaining to the Timothy McVeigh and Nichols explosion. that the whole truth, nothing but the truth, did not come out to the accuracy of that event. And until it does, there will not be true healings of that in which what occurred.
What many people hadn't seen before or simply refused to see cannot be ignored any longer. You see it in so many places. There's greater recognition that for too long we've allowed a narrowed, cramped view of the promise of this nation to fester. The view that America is a zero-sum game where there's only one winner. If you succeed, I fail. If you get ahead, I fall behind. If you get a job, I lose mine. And maybe worst of all, if I hold you down, I lift myself up. Instead of, if you do well, we all do well. We see that in Greenwood. This story isn't about the loss of life, but a loss of living, of wealth and prosperity and possibilities that still reverberates today. Mother Fletcher talks about how she was the only able to attend school in the 4th grade and eventually found work in the shipyard as a domestic worker. Mr. Van Ellis has shared how even after enlisting and serving in World War II, he still came home to struggle with a segregated America. Imagine all those hotels and dinners and mom and pop shops that could have been passed down this past 100 years. Imagine what could have been done for black families in Greenwood. Financial security and generational wealth. If you come from backlines like my family, working class, middle class family, the only way we ever able to generate any wealth is inequity in our homes. Imagine what they contributed then, what they could have contributed all these years. Imagine a thriving Greenwood in North Tulsa for the last 100 years. But that would have meant for all of Tulsa, including the white community. While the people of Greenwood rebuilt again in the years after the massacre, it didn't last. Eventually, neighborhoods were redlined on maps, locking black Tulsa out of home ownership. A highway was built right through the heart of the community. Lisa, I was talking about our west side, what 95 did after we were occupied by the military, after Dr. King was murdered. The community, cutting off black families and businesses from jobs and opportunity. Chronic underinvestment from state and federal governments denied Greenwood even just a chance of rebuilding. We must find the courage to change the things we know we can change. That's what Vice President Harris and I are focused on, along with our entire administration, including our Housing and Urban Development Secretary, Marcia Fudge, who's here today. Because today we're announcing 2 expanded efforts targeted toward black wealth creation that will also help the entire community. The first is my administration has launched an aggressive effort to combat racial discrimination in housing. That includes everything from redlining to the cruel fact that a home owned by a black family is too often appraised at a lower value than a similar home owned by a white family. And I might add, and I need help if you haven't answered this one, I can't figure this one out, Congressman Horsford. But if you live in a black community and there's another one on the other side of the highway, it's a white community, it's built by the same builder, and you have a better driving record than the guy with the same car in the white community, you're getting paid more for your auto insurance. Shockingly, the percentage of black American homeownership is lower today in America than when the Fair Housing Act was passed more than 50 years ago. Lower today. That's wrong. And we're committed to changing that. Just imagine if instead of denying millions of Americans the ability to own their own home, and build generational wealth. We made it possible for them to buy a home and build equity into that home and provide for their families. Second, small businesses are the engines of our economy and the glue of our communities. As president, my administration oversees hundreds of billions of dollars in federal contracts.